and Kiyosaki talking about passive streams of income, and then me listening to the Hamilton cast during that song, My Shot. And they're like chanting, take your shot, take your shot, take your shot.
Yep.
And I was like, all right, I got to take my shot. Like,
That's
what am I
awesome.
doing trying to get a job in marketing and digital marketing? I had done it for 18 years. I was burned out. I worked long, hard hours doing it in New York City. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not passionate about that. I like real estate, but doing it as a hobby for 10 years, I've done okay with it. Can I make that my full-time job? And so I took my shot, and haven't really looked back since.
Welcome to the Threefold Real Estate Investing Podcast. This is the podcast where you'll not only learn how you can achieve massive success in multifamily real estate investing, but also how you can simultaneously pursue great relationships with your family and a better walk with God. You can achieve financial freedom through real estate investing without sacrificing the relationships that mean the most to you. Now, here's your host, Lee Yoder.
Welcome back, Threefold listeners. I hope you're having a great week this week. We've got another great guest today. Matt Picheny is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. A little bit about him, and then we'll bring him in. He is a real estate investor. He's also a Tony Award winner. I think it's the first time I've had one of those on the show, so that's exciting. He's the author of a great book, #1 best-selling book, Backstage Guide to Real Estate. You can see where maybe that title came from. He is focused on developing passive income streams that enable investors like himself to write their own story and choose how they want to spend their time. Matt has over 15 years of experience revitalizing and elevating communities through real estate investment and has invested in over 10,000 apartments nationwide. He's a licensed real estate agent and has earned both commercial real estate and real estate finance certificates from Boston University. He's a member of the Forbes Real Estate Council, the Fast Company Executive Board, and is an advisor to a prop tech company. And he was also a speaker at the Left Field Investors Conference in Columbus that I got to go to. So that's where I got to meet Matt in person for the first time. So Matt, so much there. But first of all, just thanks for joining us. Thanks for cutting out time and coming on the podcast today.
Well, Lee, thank you for such a nice, warm introduction and for having me as a guest on your podcast.
A lot of stuff I want to get into, Matt, but do you mind taking us back? Just how did you get into real estate? So you won a Tony. How does that transfer over to real estate? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Well, the Tony actually happened later. So,
really? Okay.
Yeah, I'll loop that back in a second. Okay,
cool.
I'll give you the lay of the land. Is that basically I grew up in Orlando, Florida, moved to New York City to pursue a career in theater. Was a professional actor for 5 years. I was in 15 different productions all across the United States. I started tinkering around with computers. It's a hobby. And this was in the mid-90s when the big .com heydays. I got really involved in website development and had my own company doing website development in New York City. 2001 rolled along and my business was imploding.
Yeah.
Because 2001 was the big .com bubble, had burst.
Yep.
And all of my clients were going out of business.
Yeah.
The ones that were staying in business were not spending money on digital marketing.
Right. Yep.
And at that exact time, I got a phone call from my landlord telling me I had 90 days to get out of the apartment that I was living in.
Wow.
So here I was with a failed business, no job, and about to get kicked out of where I was living. So I had to figure something out. I wanted to stay in New York. But this, it really seemed like Mission Impossible back then, but I really dug in deep and found that I actually got a job at Showtime, the cable television channel. They were a client of mine. So that I got a job in-house there. And instead of renting an apartment, I was looking to rent an apartment. I found an apartment on the upper west side, an area called Washington Heights. So upper Manhattan. Okay. And that was an area that I could afford. I found an apartment that was for sale. I actually bought a little one-bedroom apartment, lived in there for a little over 2 years, and sold it, and saw my initial investment, my down payment, more than quadruple in value. That was the light bulb moment for me.
Yeah.
At that point, I had been working at Showtime for a while. I had a very good salary, but that one real estate transaction, I got more than like a full year's worth of salary. So I just was like, oh my gosh, how do I make that happen again?
Yep.
And that's when I really started to
Okay.
get involved in real estate. And I did real estate as a hobby for about 10 years.
Okay.
Something I did on the side.
And that's just buying more small rentals and managing them yourself. And then what'd that look like?
I end up buying a little piece of property, about almost an acre worth of trees in Connecticut, in Northwest Connecticut, in a community that it's a lake community. I was not getting lakeside property.
Yeah.
But I had access to the lake. So it's a private community.
Okay.
And so I just had a bunch of trees for a number of years. And then finally, we cut those trees down and built a house. And that house was a rental house, actually.
Wow.
And so I learned a lot about renting, about everything. I mean, being involved in the construction, I learned like literally from the ground up what a house is made of.
Yep.
Like the whole kit and caboodle.
Yep.
And then dealing with tenants and leases. And then the accounting stuff, which I didn't know.
Sure.
I learned about like this thing called depreciation, which I didn't know and didn't even really understand, even though the CPA tried to explain it to me a bunch of times.
Yeah.
It took me like a million times really working with it to really.
Well, it's one of those things, and like so many things you just mentioned, that you really, sometimes it's like the only way to learn is by doing. And then for sure, a lot of times it's just the best way to learn is by doing. So you're learning so many of these things that maybe you can read about them in a book, but it's really difficult to really learn it until you start doing it. So you're doing it over this, decade, it sounds like, of buying and kind of, like you said, side hustle, a hobby on the side. You're doing that. What happened, or what led you to maybe start to think you might do this full time, Matt? And what did that look like?
That little book you got right behind your shoulder.
Okay. The Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Purple book. Yeah. So I moved to Miami, Florida, because my wife got a really cool job opportunity completely out of the blue.
What year was this, Matt?
2015.
Okay.
So I was listening to the book, and I was also listening to the Hamilton cast album.
Okay.
So as you know, I had that background in theater, right? I moved to the city to do theater, and Erica and I were fortunate enough to have invested in Hamilton, and we invested in some other things too. Yeah. So when we moved down to Miami, Hamilton had recently come. It came out in 2015. I was listening to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and listening to whoever was doing it. It's not Kiyosaki talking; it's someone else. But Kiyosaki's words, right, saying, "Hey, you need to build passive streams of income." So multiple streams of passive income. So I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking about, I had invested in Hamilton, but I also had the house in Connecticut, the vacation home that I talked about, the townhome in Brooklyn, and Kiyosaki talking about passive streams of income. And then me listening to the Hamilton cast during that song, My Shot. And they're like chanting, take your shot, take your shot, take your shot. And I was like, all right, I got to take my shot. Like, what am I doing trying to get a job in marketing and digital marketing? I had done it for 18 years. I was burned out. I worked long, hard hours doing it in New York City. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not passionate about that. I like real estate, but doing it as a hobby for 10 years, I'd done okay with it. Can I make that my full-time job? And so I took my shot, and haven't really looked back since.
No, I know. Knowing your story, I know. Now, I'm just imagining you coming to Erica and being like, hey, I think it's time to take my shot. And her being like, okay, we've been listening to the soundtrack too much. We need to tone it down. Like, you take it too far. What was her response like? I mean, obviously she had seen, you had a little bit of a track record and you guys have been doing it for a little bit. So it's not like, hey, just read Robert Kiyosaki, read Rich Dad Poor Dad, got this new idea. But just what was maybe some of the conversation like there? I mean, she's got a job and a good job. So maybe that kind of gave you guys some freedom to do it. But yeah, just what was your guys'
that definitely gave us some freedom. So when Erica first met me, I was just finishing up building the house in Connecticut.
Okay.
So I think she's always seen me as sort of an entrepreneurial type person, right? Yeah.
And into real estate. You've been into real estate the whole time.
Doing like entrepreneurial real estate stuff while working like a full-time big job at, advertising agencies, like managing departments and stuff. But she's always known that side of me. part of the conversation with the move to Miami was an insistence by us that her salary be enough to sort of cover our subsistence costs when we got down there, because we didn't know how long it might take me to get a job. The salary she got wasn't quite enough to cover what we needed. We moved into a rental, it was a single family home, but it was a rental. So our expenses were pretty low because of the Hamilton investment and because of the cash flow we were getting off of the Brooklyn property. We were like, okay, we'll be fine. Like, we've got these other things that are coming in. If we add that to her salary, like, we're good. So that was the whole thing for me, because that's what we were already kind of doing. And I was like, well, darn, if I sit there like Kiyosaki's saying, and I get more of these, because I was already seeing it was kind of covering some of us.
You were seeing how it supplemented.
Get that to cover everything. And that's what I explained to Erica. And she was like, yeah, let's do that. Like, she's been I have a wonderful wife. Amazing. She's an amazing person.
So important.
Very supportive,
Well, cool, man. So thanks for giving us that story. I mean, that's helpful. I think a couple of things. One, it does help often, for a couple, whether it's the guy or the girl that has the salary, and then the other one gets the side hustle going. That's very helpful to have that. So again, why it's good to have a good partnership in your marriage. And then you guys controlled your expenses, just seeing multiple times of you guys, living in a duplex and house hacking, renting out one side, renting instead of buying. I mean, so many people want to get down to Miami and buy their dream home right away. And maybe you can make it work, but then you don't give yourself that freedom to allow one salary to cover your expenses or close to it, so that one of you can go out. And so a lot of times you really do have to sacrifice early to win late. You have to, and Kiyosaki and some of the guys talk about stuff like that too. Just, if you can delay your gratification, a lot of times you can build up a lot bigger and better things for the future. So I see you guys doing that and laying the groundwork. And a few of the things you've done along the way have gotten you to this point where, okay, now you're in a position where you can literally not go get a job, which there's not very many families and married couples that can do that, but it's a lot of the things you guys did for, what you said, working 18 years. I mean, it wasn't a small amount of time of you guys.
And I had built up a nest egg too. Like, I had a considerable amount of money, not considerable, but I had like a little bit of money in the bank to
give you like a runway.
Needed to, And I actually started using that to invest in the real estate deals.
Nice. Yeah. So it's so important because, for somebody that says, well, I want to go do what Matt's doing. Okay. But remember, Matt did a lot of things for years to set himself up. And that's typically the case. It's not something real estate's not a get rich quick scheme. Like everybody says that, you can get very, very wealthy, but it's
I was 42 when I started.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I had like, it's not like I was 20 years old with, I had been saving for 20 years.
You'd had half of a career. What did it look like then? I mean, this is completely different to say, hey, this isn't a side hustle. This, I'm all in on this. I'm, taking my shot here. What did that look like? How did you jump in, and maybe just kind of take us through that, as quick as you want, to kind of where you're at today with your portfolio?
I kind of went down some paths.
Sure.
So I originally I was going to do tax liens and and acquire properties through that. And then I was going to use those and flip them to generate cash, and then use the cash from those to buy long-term single family properties.
Yep.
That was my initial plan.
That's kind of more of what you knew was the single family stuff, the small stuff. That's what you knew at this point.
Yeah. What I didn't know is that you can only really buy 10 of those.
Okay. Yep.
Because once you get 10, the financing changes completely, right? You can only get 10 conventional loans. So what happens is you kind of hit a ceiling there. And so, look, I once I found that out, I did the math. I was like, okay, if I get $200 a month cash flow,
per single family rental
per door.
Yeah.
Then assume I buy 10 single family. So I'm at,
$2,000 a month.
$2,000 a month. So that's like what, $24,000 a year, which I'm not complaining. I love that $24,000 a year, but like, is that going to be
hoping for a little more?
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, well, you actually, if you're married and you're only doing the properties in your name, your spouse can also do them in their name. Now, Eric and I had bought the place in Brooklyn with both of our names, so we each only had 9 slots, but I was like, well, I can do that. But even if I got 20, that's still $48,000 a year, which again, hey, I'm happy to have $48,000 a year, but I don't know if that's enough for like me and my wife and our 2 kids to like live a nice life. I mean, could we get by? Yeah, I mean, you can get by on that, but I wanted maybe something a little different,
Sure.
So so I started trying to figure out how can I scale up. So I was doing some fix and flips, and I never got any tax lien stuff. I got some stuff from like HUD, but whatever. Anyway, I bought some properties and did that. And I was really I was full time, right? I decided to do this like in like November, December. And I said, all right, January 1st, I'm a real estate investor, right? And so January 1st of 2016, I started this, and I spent all my time. I didn't have a lot of deals going on, especially at first. So a lot of time to do research and read books and scour the internet for podcasts. Back then, there was no podcasts that were talking about multifamily real estate.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Which is kind of hard to believe, because nowadays you go on to iTunes and it's like there's a gazillion of them, but back then there weren't any.
Right.
Everything was talking about like single family, fix and flips, things like that. Then I think I caught one episode of, I think it was like a Bigger Pockets episode, which had like one guy on it, and he mentioned something about something called syndication, and I was like, wait, what's that? And it turned out that guy had a podcast. So I was like listening to his podcast for like months, waiting for him to talk about syndication again, because I didn't know what it was. And then he did, and he had like someone on who did whatever. And then I found out about this thing, and it was like a weekend seminar, like all about syndication. Yeah. And I went to that, and I was like, this is where I need to be. And so I heard about syndication. I'm like, oh, I can join together with like a bunch of investors, and we can all pool our money together and buy these, buy an apartment complex. Like, that sounds awesome. And so that's when I really got involved in that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. I mean, a couple of great things there, like seeing the power of real estate and investing in specifically kind of multifamily, because a single family, you can rent it and it makes money. But when you saw that duplex and 2 units, I thought kind of where you were going to go with that. And my mind kind of goes, there's like, okay, if one resident can pay the mortgage and then we get someone else in the other one, like, what if we had a couple more units, where 1 or 2 units is enough to cover the mortgage, and you just start seeing, because you're talking about single families and we can only do 10 loans and it doesn't scale. And that's really what it's about, is how can we actually scale this? If you want to do it full time, if you want to do it to where it allows you to stop working, you need some scale, but you need a lot of money to take down a multifamily property. So that's where syndication comes in. And syndication, is just really another way of saying group investing, where you go and get a group of people to buy an apartment building. So kind of follow you through that, Matt. How do you get other people to want to do that with you? So you've got this great idea, and you've kind of had the experience to put the pieces together, and the education as well, to say, yeah, this totally makes sense. I'm going to go here. How do you get other people to do that? How'd you get started into it?
When I started January 1st of 2016, I sent out an email. So I had, I don't know what you're like, Lee, but like when I meet someone and I become friends with them, especially as like a work colleague or whatever, I'll put them in my contact list. Okay. But then like after I leave that job, it's not like I go through my contact list and delete everybody. They just stay there. They just stay in the contact list.
Yeah.
So I had been, working in New York City for 23 years. Both my, as a actor, and then, in advertising, and worked at a number of different places and met a lot of people over the years. And I had like a pretty sizable contact list.
Sure. Yeah.
And what I did I don't know if it meets up with the compliance of spam laws and whatnot, but what I did was I sent out an email that I think it was in January or February of that year, but I sent out an email to everybody on my contact list. I uploaded them all into, I think it was MailChimp or, something like that. And I sent an email and I said, hey, in case you don't know, I moved to Miami, Florida, and I'm decided to do real estate full time. So I've made this list. I'm going to send out a newsletter about my real estate adventures. If you don't want to receive this email, please, like, big bold unsubscribe here link, right? I'm like, I don't want to spam you. I don't want to clog your inbox. But if you think this is kind of interesting and you want to follow along with my journey a little bit, I'll send these out like once a quarter, and.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that approach.
So I did that.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the people who knew me in New York or had worked with me over the past 10 years, the last 10 years I was in New York, all knew that I had been doing some real estate stuff because I had been doing it on the side. I would talk about it, like people knew I had a place in Connecticut. People knew when I bought the townhouse, like people knew all kinds of stuff. So it wasn't like strange for a lot of people. It wasn't like this weird thing. It was like, oh yeah, Matt kind of did that as a hobby. And like, now he's doing it full time. That's kind of cool. And anytime I would invest in a new prop, or if I would do a fix and flip, I would post like before and after pictures and put it out to my newsletter or post it on Facebook. And anytime I invested in a deal, as a passive investor, as a limited partner, I would post that on my social media and also put it in the newsletter. And I was always very clear. I was like, hey, I'm a limited partner. I have invested in this deal. I wasn't like, oh, I'm running this deal, And in a lot of the posts on Facebook, I used to tag the sponsors. That's the people who run the deal, and be like, thank you, Lee Yoder, for sponsoring this deal. I'm so glad to be, an investor in it. So I never like made any pretenses about what my level of involvement was. But it took me about 2 years from when I started doing full-time. And, I said that in January of 2016, I was going to do full-time investing. I really started learning about syndication and started wanting to do syndication that summer. And I closed on my first deal at the end of the summer of 2018. So it took 2 years. Yeah. So during that 2.5 year period, people were receiving emails from me on a quarterly basis and seeing social media posts from me with me like buying a 300 unit property, right? Again, I was like, hey, I'm an investor, but I think people don't necessarily realize the detail or the nuance. They just were like, Matt Picheny, 300 unit, Matt Picheny, 200 unit, and they were like, well, Matt's doing these big deals now. So when I had my first deal that I was sponsoring, and I was very upfront with people, hey, this is my first deal that I'm sponsoring, but I had somebody who was on my team who had done 10 deals. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this. I've got a co-pilot here who's, done a bunch of deals, been very successful, and we're doing this thing. I think a lot of people had the confidence and also just kind of knew me as a person, and knew me as a business person and had a level of trust with me and took a leap of faith with me. And we did really good on that deal. Yep. And then I had another deal. And, I've had quite a few deals now that have gone full cycle where we've, had it, we've cash flowed, and then we've sold it and made a lot of money for investors. And so they've then told their friends and family, and it's kind of expanded from there. But it started with that core, like, friends and family group, and kind of expanded from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just as far as building that list, Matt, and gaining trust, but then also just preparing people. I think that's really important because everybody's got, I think most people have a contact list like you, Matt. It may not be as extensive, and that's okay. But most people, you end up putting contacts in your phone over the years, and you don't get rid of them. So you've got those people there. But if you take that list and you've got a deal and you go to that list and say, I've got a deal, that's not going to work. What you did, Matt, was very different. For one, like, you're talking to them. Like you said, they already knew that you were in real estate because you're talking about it. So I think everybody's got to start doing that. You got to start talking to people about what you're doing in real estate. It's getting them warmed up a little bit. Oh, okay. Yeah. I knew Matt was in real estate. But then, another big step is starting the newsletter and warming them up and bringing them along your journey, so that after a year, for you, 2 years of following you along with you in this journey, seeing what you're doing, gaining trust about what you're doing. So then when you finally came to them and said, guys, I have a deal. They've probably been waiting on it, right? It's a totally different thing that they've been totally warmed up. It's like, okay, yeah, about time. Yeah, I want to get in on it with you. So
yeah, look, I was really surprised, Lee. So I'm like, I think I can raise, X amount. I'm like, but I really don't know. Like, but I hope I can. And I raised twice as much as I thought I was going.
Yeah.
because I think I had I mean, I honestly, I knew I was like warming people up, but not to the extent that it really was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was super successful. But again, it was 2 years of social media posts and updates on what I was doing prior to ever asking for anything.
I know, Matt, you're one of your superpowers, and I've heard you say this before, but I mean, I can just tell is persistence. And I mean, that's what I see in your story. And I've kind of been trying to highlight that, and that, sticking with it for a long time and doing it little by little, but then jumping in and waiting 2 years. And it's so important, especially if you want to get into multifamily, but there's so many things like this in life. And a book I really like is The Compound Effect. And I think that is like, it's just talking about persistence. It's talking about the compounding effect of persistence. If you stick with something, it feels like, over your first 2 years, Matt, from January 1st of 2016 to January 1st of 2018, the number of units you sponsored went from 0 to 0, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So you didn't get to buy anything as a sponsor, but then, I mean, what's it done from January 1st of 2018 to January 1st of 2020? Like then you start taking off, right? But it's because of what you did for those 2 years. You're building it. And I'd say, most people don't have the ability to stay persistent and stay consistent.
Yeah. I mean, it took me 2 years to get my first deal, 1 year to get my second, about 6 months to get my third. And now I do one every, 3 to 5 months or so.
Yeah.
I don't really, it just that timing just happens that way. I didn't I don't plan it. Like I could go another 2 years, I guess, if I don't find another deal. I mean, seriously, I'm only going to do things that I like and care about. And where the numbers work. It might be a little slow in 2023 with everything that's going on in the economy. We'll see.
Matt, to learn more about your story and how you did all that, you've got a great book. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Backstage Guide to Real Estate, which takes people along my journey from being an actor, knowing absolutely nothing about real estate, all the way to where I am now, an owner of over 10,000 apartment units throughout the country. Yep. So the beginning of the book starts off like really simple, like what's an asset and what's a liability. But by the end of the book, I'm doing an air rights deal. I'm doing a 1031 exchange. So it gets quite complex towards the end. And so along that journey, I share these 18 different keystone concepts that I learned along the way. And it's a really, I hope, and I've heard that it's a very fun and entertaining book to read.
It is,
I try to put a lot of humor in there because real estate is a really boring, dry subject. And I didn't want to
create a lot of numbers.
I didn't want to create another textbook, I wanted to make a fun book that's fun for people to read. And so, I mean, it's educational. There's 60 different real estate terms that are defined in the book, but it's done in a fun way with lots of really cool stories.
This has been great. I want to be respectful of your time and kind of wrap it up here. Matt, what would you say, and maybe we just talked about, but what I always like to ask, what's the key ingredient to be successful in real estate investing? What do you think that is?
Relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a relationship business. I mean, I think your whole life's about relationships, but I would not be where I am without the relationships that I made along the way. Nothing that I've gotten in real estate has been something that I've done on my own. And it's never been something that, there's always been someone who's kind of like helped me in one fashion or another.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially early on. I mean, I just think your story, Matt, you get down to Miami and like, you really only knew a little bit about real estate. I mean, you just didn't know what you didn't know. So you're thinking, I guess I'm going to buy foreclosures and do single family homes. But you didn't talk that much about the specific relationships, but I can tell through your story, you started meeting people, you started talking to people. And even if it was through podcasts and people going syndication, and then you going, wait, what's that? Listen to more people, talk to more people. And all of a sudden you start going the path that really, I think you were built for. But you're not going to figure that out on your own. Now, Matt, I always like to ask this too. What do you think then is a key ingredient to having success in your family or things outside of real estate, whether it's faith or something like that? But how have you maintained that, Matt? So you're, obviously, work really hard. You're an entrepreneur. When you get into real estate, you can kind of go all in on it, and stay very busy. What are you doing? Maybe you and Erica doing that helps you maintain your priorities and have success outside of real estate as well?
Yeah. My wife and I have a date night.
Yeah. Love it.
Once a week.
Yep.
Got that. It's on my calendar.
Yep.
And it gives us a chance to sit down and basically talk about what we're going to do that weekend with the kids. Actually,
Yeah,
as well.
but it's just you and her. It's time.
Yeah.
And if you don't put it on the schedule, it might not happen. I mean, we won't do something.
It won't.
Else.
It won't. It doesn't get on the schedule. There's so much. We have 2 young kids, and we both have, busy business careers, and so there is a lot. You got to set that time aside.
You do. Yeah. So important. Good stuff. Well, Matt, thanks so much, man. I really enjoy your story. Very, very down to earth, persistence all the way through. So get Matt's book. We'll put that in the show notes, Matt. And then Picheny.com. That's where we should send people, right? I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn as well, but Picheny.com too.
Yes, please. Picheny.com is the place to go for the book, for the newsletter. I got free downloads of all kinds of stuff. Like, go check out Picheny.com. There's a bunch of free stuff for educational materials. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Matt. This has been a lot of fun. We'll send people, to Picheny.com, and people should check out your book. But thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, Lee, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for another great episode. I hope you'll take action on what you've learned today. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving Lee a 5-star rating and review. And check him out on threefoldrei.com. Until next time, 1 Timothy 6:17.